Yeah, it's that perception. So yeah, absolutely.
Okay, welcome everybody. Sorry, I was just waiting for the signal to make sure that we were properly logged on and live. Welcome to our special meeting of council, our first E-Town Hall budget meeting for Wednesday, February 15th, 2017. So that means that everybody who is participating in history here in Port Alberni. So thank you for taking the time and showing the interest to come and ask your questions about this year's budget. Council, we have an agenda in front of us. A motion to approve the agenda would be in order.
Second.
All in favor? Carried. Thank you. I'd like to recognize that we are on the traditional territory of the Hupechesit and the Sechot First Nations. Council, our job today is providing an opportunity for the public to participate essentially in our 2017 to 2021 5-year financial plan. Council to this point has exhibited incredible discipline in order to get to where we are. Council has given direction to staff that we expect to be able to live within our means as a city, and we expect to use savings to, over time, increase our investment in infrastructure. And when I say we are exhibiting incredible discipline, what I mean by that is we're not doing something that is going to dramatically benefit this city this year. What we're doing is, in the future years, we're putting the city in a position where it will be able to meet its bills. And there's a critical difference in that. We're planning for future councils. We're planning for future residents of Port Alberni. Yes, the budget's for 2017, but the impact of what we're doing, the discipline that we're showing, will carry on far into the future. And the dividends that these decisions that we're faced with this year will actually come back not to us as this present council, but to future councils. It's a very different process. So, Deputy City Clerk, you have an overview of the E-Town Hall meeting and procedures and process and what it's going to look like. So I'll turn it over to you.
Pioneer. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council, and my thanks to everyone here in attendance tonight, both here at City Hall and, of course, watching online. As the Mayor said, this is our first E-Town Hall format. It's a format that we hope to make much greater use of as we move forward, and I think we'll be seeing more and more participation, and this is a sort of evolution of the nature of engagement with the public, and I think it's a positive where people can participate in a meeting but not necessarily have to be here. So it's exciting, and we're glad to be doing this tonight. Tonight's meeting represents sort of, if I could use the term, an apex of our engagement process with this financial plan. It's not the beginning, it's not the end, but it's certainly a high point in which this whole meeting is focused around public input. And as council will recall, we actually started our process a bit differently here tonight, or this year. We started with a budget survey that we put out to the public in November, and we received approximately 275 responses to that. Those responses helped to inform the draft plan before it was developed. And I'm pleased to say that many of the general desires outlined in that survey, such as maintaining our services generally and some modest reductions in certain departments, those are reflective of what's in the draft plan as it stands now. The draft plan basically now takes us to this point, and then we'll be moving forward with further budget meetings into March. We've got one scheduled on March the 1st, and of course, there is an opportunity for the public to provide input at that meeting as well. So this is, again, not the conclusion of public input, but just a focused session in that sense. As was mentioned at the beginning, this is an opportunity for council to receive information from the public. So I'm conscious that certainly some members of the public may be directly posting to our council's Facebook pages or Twitter accounts. We'd ask that you direct those to us through the main channels that we've got published. And for those watching at home, you can email us at citypa@portalberni.ca. You can tweet us at #budgetpa, and you can also post to our Facebook event page, which is available and linked to our City of Port Alberni local government Facebook page. There is no time limit tonight on the questions that will be posed. Certainly many of you will recall or be familiar with our 3-minute timer at the beginning of our regular meetings. We will not have that timer in use, but we will be encouraging folks to be succinct with their points so that we can ensure that we receive all the input from the members of the public. I would also advise residents that the input that you do submit will form part of the public record, so it will not be anonymous, and we would, of course, be treating this information in accordance with the Freedom of Information and Privacy Act. Another advisement for the public would be we'd be asked that you keep your comments constructive and respectful. Those comments that do not meet those guidelines will not be brought forward for council's consideration. So we'd ask that you keep those fair and respectful. And finally, in the interest of making sure that we get to everything, we want to provide an opportunity for council to respond to questions, but we also want staff. We have a contingent of staff here tonight that can also respond to the questions that come forward. So as mayor, as the chair of this meeting, you're certainly welcome to turn over questions to staff or turn over other questions for input from other members of council here. With that, I think I'd like to turn it over to our CAO, Tim Ply. And yes, Mr. Mayor?
Just one point.
Yeah.
We have some councillors here who are very proficient with Facebook. Is it possible that they will get some questions directed to them by Facebook, and if so, what should we do?
I'd be surprised if they didn't. But we're hoping that they will direct those to us, again, so that they can be incorporated into the main record of this meeting, and then they can be brought forward. We'll be intermixing opportunities for the public to come forward to the microphone with input from online. So I'll be waving my hand at you, Mr. Mayor, periodically throughout the meeting, and would then be pleased to bring forward any questions or comments from these online channels.
As council knows, you might have to wave more than once.
Be happy to do so. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to our CAO to provide an overview of the 2017-21 5-year plan. And following that, we can proceed with some public input.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jake. Mr. Mayor, Council, members of the public, I'm going to walk you through a PowerPoint presentation, and I'm going to go at a fairly fair clip because you've seen all the slides before. You've seen some of them in a presentation I made to you February 1st, and you've seen the remainder in a budget meeting February 8th, I believe, February 8th. So we've combined the presentations from those two meetings to provide an overview of the budget, and from that we think this will be the platform from which the public can ask questions. We've numbered all the slides. I think there's 21 of them. So if members of the public have a question that's specific to a slide, they can say on slide X, I have a question, and they will know which slide to refer to. So we may end up, Mr. Mayor, scrolling back and forth through this presentation during the question period. I don't think I'm going to be able to click, Jake, so you're going to have to move for me. Let me try it. No, not yet. I think we just do this to embarrass people. No, was that me or you? Oh, good. Okay, so background. Early in, well, mid-2016, early in this process, Council heard from me that some of the challenges the city faces that include lack of growth in population and thus tax base. Also that as we've known for a long time, we have inadequate funding for infrastructure renewal, and that we have a heavy reliance on industrial taxation to pay for the services that we provide. Thanks, Jake. So based on that and some other inputs, council received inputs from another number of sources. You gave direction to staff, and you said that you wanted to take a different approach to budget development process, and this is what that looks like. As you've seen so far, it's been very different, and I think this e-town hall is going to work very nicely for us. You also said that you wanted to start to develop true five-year financial plans, not one-year plans with 4 years added on. And I'm very pleased that we're still on course for that. You directed that we set a course that gradually redirects, doesn't reduce, but redirects taxation from heavy industry away from our day-to-day operations and rather to be spent on infrastructure and into reserve funds to be spent on future infrastructure. And you said that you anticipated that there would be about a 2% shift per year in terms of our operational dependency on industrial taxation. And that you would like a direction that if we sustained it for 12 years, even though we're talking today about a 5-year budget, if that direction was sustained for 12 years through a series of councils, that at the end of that 12 years, all of the money we get from heavy industry, all the taxation would be going completely to infrastructure renewal. So based on the direction that council gave to me, I gave direction to department heads to submit budgets that included operational cost increase not more than 5% over a 5-year period. And that is a go backwards budget. That doesn't cover inflationary costs. So in every area, the direction was to submit a budget that was a reduction budget. And we knew full well that we would be talking about limited, or hopefully limited, some reductions in services. And staff was directed to point out to council when the time came where those reductions would occur based on that budget direction. So this draft 5-year plan that is before you includes some limited reductions in services. It also includes some innovations that I'm quite pleased with. It shows a net increase in city's operational costs of 5% over 5 years. That was our target. I don't know that we've reached that or if we've exceeded it when we put them all together. We looked at the budget department by department. I take an operational perspective to the city operations, so I was dealing with department by department. And at the same time as we're seeing only a 5% increase in expenditures over 5 years, we're seeing over a 300% increase in the money that we'll have available for infrastructure. So going from $770,000 in 2016 that we spent from taxation on infrastructure, which clearly is not enough, that by 2021, the 5th year of this financial plan, will have available to us $2.8 million from taxation for infrastructure renewal. So clearly puts us on the right path. That budget involves a reduction across the city of 4.7 full-time equivalent positions. And I'm very pleased that none of those are by layoff. Those are all by attrition. And it was important to us that this long-term direction also not negatively impact our employees. So this does not take work away from any of our employees. And it also includes taxation increases that do not exceed 3% in any 1 year, and that is across all classes. So that was important as well to council, that we strike a balance that included controlling costs and modest tax increases. And there's an asterisk next to classes, as you'll see. Go to the next slide, Jake, please. So in this slide, it shows the tax increases in each of the 5 years, plus the previous year, 2016. And we've got an asterisk next to 2.7 in 2016 and 3% in 2017. In 2016, our residential tax increase on average was 2.7%. Business went up less than that, and heavy industry went up 0 because it's frozen for a 5-year term, the last year of that being 2017. The budget envisions that in 2017, business and residential will go up 3%, but heavy industry will remain at 0 as per our agreement to freeze for 5 years. But starting in 2018, taxation on all classes will go up 3% and 3% every year after that. And you can see on the right-hand column the amount of money year after year incrementally increasing that's available, taxation money available for infrastructure. So you've seen this slide before. This slide shows us the amount of money from taxation that we've been spending on on infrastructure, capital projects we call them. And you'll see that it's below 1.5 million from about 2011, and it's declined and flattened out over the previous 3 years at around $770,000 in 2016. And again, not enough money. So if we project that graph forward for the 5 years that we're looking at, we added 5 more years onto that graph, and that trend line starts to move in the right direction. And it goes up from 2017 to 2021 to $2.8 million is what this budget projects. Not there yet, but headed in the right direction. And if we were to continue that direction for 12 more years, this is extrapolating that out for 12 years. Actually, it's 13. I counted the dots. But at 2028, I believe, we would have all of our heavy industry tax dollars going to infrastructure. And if we plotted out on that same chart what our heavy industry tax dollars were, they would those lines would intersect in 2028. So this shows, if Jake can click the mouse one more time, that circle shows you the years that we're looking at that are in this 5-year plan, and shows you the years behind us and the years ahead of us. The course we've taken, the course we're considering taking today over the next few months, and then what future councils might take going forward. And this graphic shows, this is part of the presentation you saw February 8th. It shows you some of the numbers around the city, the types of services we provide, the volumes of services. Jake? Hard to read, but this presentation is available online for people who want to ask questions. They can read this online and see it better than people in the room here. This is a one-page overview of the city's strategic plan. And as Mr. Mayor, as you mentioned, this budget addresses a number of points within that plan, primarily living within our means, our current means, and investing in infrastructure. And we believe that following that path will also fulfill a number of other components within that plan. So next we're going to look at some budget by budget. No, next we're not. Let's look at our overall expenses. So this just breaks down, it's a pie chart, breaks it down department by department where the city's expenditures are in percentage basis. And the next slide shows where our revenues come from. 64% from property taxes, which is fairly standard in the municipal sector. So next we'll look at department by department, and I'll summarize each of those as we go through. So I told you the direction to department heads was bring in a budget that did not exceed 5% increase in expenditures, in net expenditures over 5 years. And that has different impacts in different departments. So in fire, where 90% of the net expenditures are in personnel costs, there is nowhere to go but impact personnel, which impacts level of service. So you'll see that in order to come in at 5% increase over 5 years, this projects that in 2017 we don't fill a current vacancy, so our crew remains down 1 firefighter. And again in 2020, by attrition, we would reduce 1 more firefighter. So for a cumulative effect over 5 years of 2 fewer firefighters in 5 years from where we were in 2016. Economic development, fairly small operation, 2 employees. There's a small reduction in funding and trade shows and other external promotions, and we have some salary costs that are beyond our control, and we've basically put no inflationary increases on pretty much everything else in the economic development budget to get us to the 5% budget target. On police services, this is fairly convoluted, so I'll take a little bit of time here. So police costs come to us, the cost for the contract we have with RCMP, some of the numbers come to us from the RCMP. They calculate what drives their costs and they pass those on to us. So we have limited ability to affect those. We tried to get this down to 5% and we're not able to in this case. So what the budget that you see in front of you includes, you will possibly recall that in 2016 we increased the members that the city pays for from 33 to 34, but we didn't increase the expenditures or the budget that we provided for police. Instead, we said we're going to rely on the surplus that we get, the unspent funds from policing every year, because we have a fairly long history of that budget being underexpended. We said we're going to rely on that surplus to pay for one member. So we increased the membership but didn't increase the budget, and we began to rely on the surplus. So this budget anticipates that in 2017, we rely on that surplus to pay us back the cost of 2 members. So we've reduced the budget by 1 member, and that's what it's included in what you see there. And it proposes that we will rely on that surplus to give us enough money, $334,000 in 2017, to cover the cost of 2 members. Historically, that surplus has provided for that. Is there a chance that it might not? There's a chance. We also have a fairly unique opportunity in that we've been putting in the bank much of that surplus money we've been getting from previous years. So we have $1 million in a reserve fund for policing. And so we have the ability to lean on that reserve fund if we have a tough year financially. So we propose that we underfund that department by 2 members, that if we are not able for some reason in any one year to realize that in surplus, excuse me, that we would then, council would consider whether to dip into that reserve to make up the shortfall that year. And if we're going to do that, we're relying on that surplus more heavily, then staff suggests that we remove the $1 million cap on that reserve. And when we have years where there is a surplus, even above the cost of the 2 members, that we allow that reserve fund to go up above $1 million so that there clearly is enough money in case we have an over expenditure year. Council has expressed that, some councillors have expressed that you might not be comfortable not having a cap on that fund. If you want to consider a different cap, we can do that. But going forward with only $1 million in that fund and underfunding by 2 members, I'm suggesting to you is not good financial practice. So also in 2017, this budget includes hiring of a city employed manager. We have a number of employees who work, city employees who work in the detachment supporting the RCMP, and those employees are not adequately managed or supported. And we need to have a manager in that facility to give them what they need to perform, to do the job that we need them to do. We also would benefit from having that city employed manager working inside the RCMP detachment to support management at City Hall in best representing the city's interest in managing our contract with the RCMP. That's a $6 million contract that we haven't been providing adequate oversight to, and we need some help to manage our own interests in terms of that agreement. So I get that that's a $100,000 cost, and we're supposed to be bringing the budget down. So in 2018, we're anticipating that we would bring that budget down $80,000, which is the equivalent cost of 1 municipal employee. That doesn't mean we would have 1 less employee. It means that our manager and I and the inspector would be working very hard to find savings of $80,000 and try to avoid reducing staff there, because as we've heard, that detachment feels they need more staff, not less. Further, in 2019, this budget involves a reduction of 1 uniformed RCMP member, and that gets us a total of 9.5% increase over 5 years. Jake? So under planning, which includes building and bylaw, this budget we had to 5%, and as I told you, I think at the last meeting, that after we had got it to 5%, we realized that we hadn't bundled into there a couple of things. One, the vehicle maintenance costs for the bylaw enforcement vehicle, and the net cost of commissionaires, which is parking tickets. And so by adding those in, we're up to a 6.3 increase over 5 years. That 6.3, 1.3, I guess, if you subtracted out the 5, 1.3% over the budget target on what is a small net budget equates to about $4,000. And we can reduce that budget further by $4,000 to meet the $5,000 target if council desires that. And that budget target was met by reducing the money that was in that budget for consulting services. Jake? Public Works. So we're showing a 3.4% increase over 5 years, which is pretty amazing given some of the cost drivers that we face there. There's some things that have contributed to that include increase in cemetery fees that now will cover the full costs of services. So taxation will not be subsidizing cemetery operation. We're going to realize a reduction in our annual power costs as a result of the LED streetlights that we installed last year. And we're also going to gradually increase garbage collection fees so that by the 5th year, those fees will fully cover the service cost that we have for residential garbage. And what's not on that slide is that this budget was based not on the previous year's budget, but on previous year's actual expenditures. So Manager of Operations Takuma has done some very good work in this budget area, looking at previous costs and bringing in a budget that reflects those costs from previous years. Under Heritage, I wanted to break out Heritage from Parks, Rec, and Heritage because it's a point of interest to council and the community. So this Heritage budget includes costs for museum, McLean Mill, steam train, Industrial Heritage Center, basically the industrial heritage network that the city is a part of. So what you'll see in this budget is that the museum itself has met the 5% target. My recollection is that they are about 4% over 5 years. I could be wrong on that, but it was under 5%. The bulk of the reduction that has realized the negative 11.9 over 5 years comes from McLean Mill. So you'll see in the list there that we're projecting some increased revenues at the museum through sales and admissions. We anticipate that we will negotiate ourselves out from utility costs for the Industrial Heritage Center, the train station, the roundhouse. We anticipate a 50% reduction in the McLean Mill subsidy by 2021. The city's McLean Mill Society is doing some very good work, and those are their budget projections. The final bullet says that, budget aside, the process remains underway for the development of a new service delivery model for the Alberni Valley Museum. Thanks. So this is Parks and Recreation with the heritage component pulled out of that. And you'll see a 3.8% budget increase over 5 years. Again, very pleased with that budget figure given the complexity and size of that department. What you'll see there is in 2017, we've eliminated one management position, and at the same time we full-timed one of our part-time positions for a net reduction of 0.8 of a position. And this budget includes increases in revenues from leases and facility rentals and user fees and concessions. So the Parks and Recreation administrative team have taken a very business-like approach to the revenue sources that we have. This department realizes well over $1 million revenue every year. It's a big component of their operation. And it also includes a planned reduction of use in casual employees through departmental reorganization. And that's something that we plan to take advantage of as people transition out of positions or retire, that we would restructure or reschedule those positions to reduce the amount of casual employee use. Government and administration. This is pretty much upstairs at City Hall, so it includes human resources, finance, clerk's department, administration, and IT. And it shows a negative 12% over 5 years. And we've done some good innovating and some good reorganizing. There's an electronic records management system proposed for 2017. In 2017, due to retirement, we proposed to reduce a half-time position. And in 2019, this is a projection. We project an opportunity to have a 0.4 reduction by attrition. And I have to tell you that a lot of the revenues the city receives for different services and fees come into this budget. So that negative 12% is not a result of diminishing employee costs. In large part, it's a result of increasing revenues. In year 2021, you'll see a $200,000 budget change. That is primarily due to the fact that this budget includes that in 2021, the city intends to negotiate with the Port Authority that an increase in payment in lieu of taxes. And we currently are in year 2 of a accord with the Port Authority that that precludes any renegotiation of fees. But this envisions that we will be working with our Port Authority partners to increase that revenue. And the last slide is again a catch-all and a summary of some of the. It doesn't project well here, but if you're looking online, you can read some of these things. Tells you some of the where some of the money is going, the capital money. And this slide doesn't show just money from taxation; it shows capital or infrastructure money from all sources. So, Mr. Mayor, it probably took a little longer than I wanted to because we want to get to public input and questions. But if you have any quick questions, I can answer those, but I'd prefer to sit down and hear from the public.
I think Council's had lots of opportunity to ask questions, but there may be some emergent questions. Council, anything that you need to ask at this point? No, I think we're quite anxious to see and hear what the public wants to know. So at this point, it is an opportunity for the public to ask questions or make comments on what you see. And I would open it up. Anybody in this room here who would like to make a comment on the budget, anything specific or just a general comment, please come up to the lectern, give your name and address, and let us know what you're thinking. City Clerk.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We've had a number of submissions from online, I'm pleased to say, and so I'd like to bring forward just a couple of comments that we received. These are not so much questions as they are comments, and these came through email, and again, I'll repeat the address for those that are watching at home. It's citypa@portalberni.ca. And of course, you can submit your questions and comments on the fly here as we're going through this meeting. So the first one, I'll just I'm going to paraphrase here. Some of these are quite lengthy, so in the interest of time, I'll just summarize here. An email from Sarah Brook basically provides support for the Economic Development Department's advertising budget, and is encouraging the city to spread the reach of the televised video promoting Port Alberni and basically specifying it should be aired in major cities beyond just BC. Also stating that we should be increasing highway signage, directing people towards Port Alberni. The RV park is a stellar idea that's been put forward. And expressing concern around Vancouverites and others considering Port Alberni as a mill town, suggesting that we should garner their interest in what we offer today so that they can get those images out of their heads, and it's time to stand strong in support of diversity going forward. So that again is from Sarah Brook via email. And the other one I'll just paraphrase. This is an email from Mr. Rusty Phillips, who is unable to attend tonight, but is writing to strongly encourage council to maintain the present number of fire department personnel and not consider to vote or diminish the number. Mr. Phillips references the Workers' Compensation Board and some of the regulations with respect to that. The other aspect that he encourages the city to keep in mind is that the fire department personnel are the most effective force whenever a major disaster occurs. And as the personnel are trained in and have a wide variety of skills and experience, they're mobile, have good communication systems, and have an experienced and effective chain of command. Any reduction in the personnel numbers leaves the city more vulnerable to slower and less effective responses. That coming from email, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Anybody in the audience wish to address the budget? Pam Craig. Whichever one.
Good evening. I'm Pam Craig, and I live on 6211 Smith Road. And I'm here tonight as a member of the Heritage Commission, and to let councillors know that it was quite distressing to hear that the museum was not a core operation or core value to you. And I want you to take a long, hard look at that. It truly is the core value for this community. this community would not be this community if it wasn't for the history and the hard work of our parents and former members of our community, which are preserved at the museum. The professional care that is taken with artifacts and documents that tell us who we were, where we came from, will therefore allow us to learn as to where we're going. And Mr. Mayor, I really was pleased to hear you say at your beginning comments that we are looking to the future. Yes, we are. And we are making history here, as you said. And that's wonderful. But the history needs to be kept in this community under professional care. And the museum is that entity. The Heritage Commission has worked diligently, very hard for the last 2 or 3 years to make sure that the collections policy is updated and is critical to being used in an appropriate way for collecting artifacts in our community. So I really urge you to take a second look at that. I know you are asking for a different way, a different model, but really in the end, the city has to have a responsibility to partake and maintain that wonderful collection. It truly is a treasure for this community. Thank you.
Thank you. On the right-hand side of the room, I saw somebody's hand. Yeah, please come forward.
Just from clarification, I'm not a finance person.
Sorry, even though we know who you are, maybe not people at home. with
Neil
you.
Anderson, Carmichael Crescent.
Thank you.
I'm not a finance person, so I find it hard dwelling through this stuff. But just for some clarification, as the Community Development Economic Development Fund, I believe that was stated at 1.9% of the budget. And am I right in saying that the economic development is being cut back? Am I right or wrong there?
City CEO, I guess I'm looking at the pie chart with,
Mr. Mayor, I think we're talking about this pie chart. Is that right, Neil? 1.9?
Yes, 1.9. That's where I'm getting the 1.9. But I understand, going through some of this information as well as I could, that there was going to be a cutback in the future budget of that committee.
Mr. Mayor, I
Yes.
believe that community development piece, 1.9% of the expenditures, is only economic development, but I would like to come back to a future meeting and report that. So we'll capture that question. But if there's a further question, I could speak to that, perhaps.
okay?
No, the reason for me asking, I think that's a vital part of moving forward in Port Alberni, and I don't think our economic development, Pat Deacon, his workload is spread out pretty well, and I think we need more of an effort to promote the valley and deal with the issues that I think that position should be dealing. So I'm concerned if we're cutting it back, but I believe we are, but I might be wrong. McLean Mills, we're talking here about facility improvements, and this is just, again, clarification. What are we talking about? Re-emphasize, if you don't mind, what we're talking about in facility improvements. I have a fairly good idea.
Okay, CAO, are you able to comment on those facility improvements? Because I don't know that council is fully aware of the specifics.
Mr. Mayor, just going to have a look at that page on Heritage. Is that where you're looking, Neil?
Probably. I can't see any of that. Can't help it.
So I think what you might be speaking to is the utility costs. Is that what you're speaking of on Heritage?
No, I'm actually looking at the proposed
okay.
capital at the end there. It says McLean Mill facility improvement, $65,000.
Okay, so what that refers to is,
Yes.
and we're showing $65,000. Is that the additional piece to capital? So, Mr. Mayor, our capital budget includes $65,000 for McLean Mill capital, not defined at this point, and so we haven't yet. So we have if you like, placeholder numbers from the McLean Mill Society. So the budget as you see it now includes $65,000 for infrastructure at McLean Mill, but not, excuse me, not identified. Almost certainly it'll include installation of the commercial kitchen, but nothing beyond that has been identified. So this is just a budget that's being held pending the actual presentation from McLean Mill Society. There is also on an options list a further $60,000 for McLean Mill. McLean Mill Society has indicated that they would like $125,000 each year, each of the 5 years for infrastructure capital budget. So while their operating budget will reduce by 50%, they have indicated they would like $125,000 each year for infrastructure as well.
Okay, and if I can just go back to the commercial kitchen, I don't know where that's at.
Yeah,
Has
the commercial kitchen will be inside that $65,000.
Yes, I understand, and I thought that's was part of it. I don't know if that's, is that a go? Is that going to happen?
We haven't had their presentation yet, and so we haven't council hasn't made a decision on
Yeah.
McLean's Mill.
And has,
Mr. Mayor, we've completed the purchase of the equipment, so the city has paid 100% for that. We own the facility, the equipment. Right now, we're putting the final touches on verifying that the septic system can approve that, and we're developing engineering drawings so that we can apply for a building permit.
so why did we purchase the equipment when council doesn't seem, from what I'm hearing, finalized the whole project?
No, what I was referring to is we haven't seen their capital proposal in terms of what they wanted to do, so
So why would we buy equipment before we know
that
what we
was
want to do?
purchased last year. That
Why?
was finalized last year.
Why?
It was part of the arrangement that we made between the two groups, between the IHS and the McLean's Mill Society.
Has anyone done a study with other projects to see if installing kitchens or anything have improved? Most heritage sites are subsidized by the government and donations, etc. Not unlike ours. Has the installation of a kitchen facility helped them balance their budget or come closer to balancing their budget? Have we done an investigation around the province to see if this has improved the return on the investments that we have there?
I'm sure the society is more than aware of our concerns in that regard.
Have they looked beyond it's an idea, well, let's put in a kitchen? Because it's not running for many, it's a huge expense, and personally I don't see how it's going to pay for itself myself, but I don't have any details. I'd like to hear what they have to say, and I would have like to have heard it prior to them purchasing the equipment.
So, yeah, exactly. I think council's looking forward to that presentation as well.
Well, okay, thank you.
Before March the 1st, I believe. Thank you. March the 1st, 2 o'clock. Okay.
Thank
City
you very
Clerk.
much. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to just bring forward another question that we've received from online. This comes from Twitter, and again, I'll repeat the hashtag BudgetPA, hashtag BudgetPA. People can tweet us. This one is asking if there was research done on how many firefighters are needed for a town this size, and then it's stating that cutting back. Asking again, was the research done on how many firefighters are needed for a town of this size? It is from at Gunny Kurt. Twitter.
Do we have any idea if they're a resident of this town or?
No.
Thanks.
No.
So the answer to that question would be, I'm sure, CAO, that we have been, we've looked at many other communities many times. Am I correct?
Mr. Mayor, previous councils have looked at the fire department numerous times and other communities as well. This might be a good question for the fire chief if he wants to respond now, or we can come back at a future meeting. Chief, we can respond to this at a future meeting if you like. Whatever works for you. Okay.
Mr. Mayor, for most communities in that, you don't want to do research on how many firefighters you need. It's what the level of service you want based on the risk that you have. There is the Fire Underwriter Survey, which can provide you an idea, and from that you can decide what type of service you want and the number of firefighters. So part of that is a comparison of other communities based on population, risk, and industry and everything like that, and then council decides where they're going to go with the number of firefighters. So there's not a set thing, and different communities are different with the demographics, so it's just based on where you feel you want to go with it.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Sobe, you had a question?
Yeah, just a question for the fire chief. Sorry to make you drag you back in here. Would that same questionnaire or survey would define, because I understand you were put in a hard position of having only 5% increase, which to me I believe is not going to even cover the certain salaries. But does that also reflect what would be the outcome of cutting 2 positions?
The budget that was put forward was cutting the 2 positions for the 5% increase, yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Councillor Paulson.
Just a quick question, and just running through and spitballing here, but in the weighting of the fire department, what weight is put on the actual industrial component that is in a community? And ours would be certainly different than Qualicum, say, just because of the industrial component. And it doesn't have to be right dead on, but I'm sure that's certainly a consideration here.
Yeah, and I'll just use the Fire Underwriter Survey as a bit of an example for it. So they'll rate different things in the community for your grade rating for the community for fire protection and that. And some of the things they look at is your fire department, what makes it up, your staffing model, response times, your equipment that you have, the water supply that the community has, and that your fire safety control and your overall fire service communications. So all those things are graded and made up, and kind of then the community is given a risk rating based on that. And so Port Alberni right now has, we're very lucky, we just received our Fire Underwriter Survey, which has improved our rating. Our residential remains at a 1. We've been at a 1 for a while. It remains that, but our industrial rating has gone up from a 4 to a 3, and there's not many communities that have that for a community our size. So our risk rating based on a response model and all the information provided, we've actually improved our rating this year at the end of 2016 and just received the final report now. So it's based on that, and they'll take a look at industry and the needs of the industry, the water supply required, the number of staff, the number of response that we best have, and then they'll rate us based on that. And from that rating, we usually take our information and decide what we need. So, and then with those recommendations or with those reports are a number of recommendations that come out as well. And so with that report, we also received a number of recommendations. How do we improve things even more? So,
Chief Gilday, we've got a few councillors' questions for you now that you're there. You thought you were getting away, but Councillor Minions, and then Councillor Sobe, and then Councillor Alamani have questions.
Thank you. Not for tonight, obviously, but I'm wondering if you could bring forward some data on call volumes, because I know we often hear that our fire department is a busy fire department, but I'm curious how we actually compare community to community for similar sized communities to ours.
absolutely. Yeah, bring that forward.
Councillor Sobe?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Would it be a fair statement that the reduction of 2 fire positions would reflect on a response model, future response model?
In the near future, and that we can manage it to try and maintain the same response model. At some point in time, we'll reach that pivot point where our overtime costs to maintain that overweigh the ability to do it. And so when we do that, when we get to that point and we reduce down to 3 on shift, it will change. We'll still respond the same way. It'll just change some of our tactics when we get there and how we do that. And it'll also change a little bit on how we're able to do the simultaneous medical calls. So some of our response model will change when we get to that point, but until we get there, we can manage it somewhat with our swing staff, and then at some point we'll have to start covering that 4th person with a lot more overtime.
Councillor Alamani, and then Councillor Washington.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was just wondering if that underwriter survey that you're referencing is available at all.
Yeah, we just received it, and we had to seek some clarification on some of the questions to make sure that new rating was right, because it may change something, some things for industry. They may get a break on their insurance. We don't know for sure. But yeah, so we just got the questions clarified, so we can certainly send that out.
That'd be great.
Yep.
Thanks.
Councillor Washington.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. For the first responder unit, what is our jurisdiction, or what is your jurisdiction? How far east, west, north, south do you go to respond?
So we respond within the city boundaries, that's a given, but we also have response agreements with the First Nations groups in the area, and also with some of the industry outside the city. We also provide road rescue all the way to the Grove, and I believe all the way to Bamfield, if I'm correct, all the way to Bamfield. So within the city, but then outside the city, and then we've also got our auto aid agreements, our mutual aid agreements with Beaver Creek, with Sprout Lake, and a mutual aid with Cherry Creek.
Councillor Paulson.
Could you do me a favor again? There still seems to be confusion around the limitations or lack of limitations between a 3-man response and a 4-man response. What can you and can you not actually do with a 3-man response? What can you actually do and not do with a 4-man response? And there's still confusion in the
Sure.
community over this.
So the 4-man response allows us, when we respond to a fire, it allows us, when we get there, we can immediately send 2 people inside. The one officer stays outside, and he's able to provide the rescue. The pump operator has to stay with the pump. So it allows us to do that and stay within the WCB regulations for that type of response. We've got 10 minutes to either execute some fire suppression activities or a rescue if somebody's in the building. And if we know somebody's coming, we've got communication, and they're going to be on scene within the 10 minutes, we can continue. If we don't know somebody else is coming, after 10 minutes, we have to pull that crew out. That's with a 4-person response, so we're immediately allowed to go inside. With a 3-person response, we have to have somebody else come there. The one person has to stay with the engine because we want them to have a water supply. So with 3 people, we can't send anybody in. We have to have other people on the scenes. We have to wait for one more to come to do that. But there's still lots we can do from the outside, and so it's not like we'll stand there. We'll still try and get water on the fire and hit it from the outside until other aid arrives. And with our mutual aid and with our callback system, it does come. It's just a matter of when it'll get there, which it isn't too long, but it still gives us that delay. So the 3-person doesn't allow us to go in right away. The 4-person does.
So the 3-man crew does not allow you to enter the building
Not immediately.
until that 4th person
Yeah,
arrives.
not until help arrives. Yeah.
Okay.
And in terms of other fire departments around the province, what's the common? What do you see most frequently, particularly in communities of our size?
I looked at some of the communities our size, and some run a few more firefighters, some run the same with a lot less call volume. So everybody's striving to maintain that 4-person response because it's the most effective response. But it's whatever model you want. Some are with less, some are with more. If you've started the model and you've started with 1 or 2 or 3 firefighters, you'll always supplement that. But most of them try and strive for the 4-person for that effectiveness to try and get that immediate response. So it varies throughout the province. If we look at like the Oak Bays, the Prince Rupert's, comparable size, and that they're running the same type of model, except they're running with a volunteer or a paid-on-call thing, except for Rupert, who doesn't have that. So they're running the same thing a lot, supplement their process with volunteers, and that were our model. I think others should look at our model because it really is the one to look at. It really works well.
And I believe you said you were going to look at the cost of overtime for ensuring that we have four people for the necessary fires, which of course most of the call-outs are not structure fires. Most of them are things other than that.
Yeah, our call-outs are structure fires, MVAs if we're outside that boundary where we can't turn around. And that, so we're going to look at the budget. We weren't able to budget as much this year as we spent last year and the year before that. So there will be some restrictions with our overtime. So at some point we'll meet that objective. If we go beyond that, then we've just exceeded our budget. So when we meet that point in our budget for overtime, that's the point we have to say, okay, you know what, we're down to 3 people on shift. If that's the case, if we've got somebody off sick, or if the one shift who has 4, somebody's off on holidays, we're down to 3.
Okay,
So,
thank you.
unless we carry on with more overtime. So
I think council's finished asking you questions, but it's possible that there's somebody in the audience that wishes to ask you a question, or maybe somebody at the at-home audience. Okay, City Clerk.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, indeed. I'm conscious that the question, we've got 4 questions that have came in via email from a Miss Debbie Haggard. And the first one is with respect to the fire department, and it's almost a duplicate of what your question just was. But I'll give the fire chief an opportunity to provide any further comments if you wish. And again, I'll paraphrase here. That it's her understanding that many other communities throughout Vancouver Island use a volunteer fire system. This is also a system used throughout the regional district. Is it possible to explore what other communities are doing to adopt a similar system? I realize that this would not be possible to implement for this upcoming budget year, but it should be looked closely at for upcoming years. This is a question comment from email. So if you'd like to provide any further comments, you can, but it's very similar in nature to the question just posed by the mayor, I understand.
Yeah, I'll just add a couple of quick comments. Often when you've got a completely career department, you want to interject or introduce volunteers to it. There's some negotiation that has to happen. It's not something that can just take place. So there's a lot of work prior to that. And also there's some good initial cost to it, outfitting everybody. When you look at probably about $3,500 per person to outfit them with gear and then training and start that process. So it's not just open the doors, here they come. There's a lot to it and a lot more to it. So we have to be prepared for that. And it's something that has to be negotiated as well with the locals. So.
Okay, thank you. Anybody in the audience wish to ask our fire chief a question before we let him sit down? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
City Clerk, another question from our audience, our at-home audience.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Again, this is 2 questions from Debbie Haggard, and these are with respect to garbage collection, so another core service of the city. So her question is, other communities have bi-weekly garbage pickup. Have you investigated the possibility of implementing bi-weekly garbage pickup? And sort of the second question that's related is, garbage trucks have an arm that picks up garbage cans. With this system, the driver never has to get out of the vehicle. So why did the garbage trucks have a driver and a passenger in? She's seen other communities use only a driver and not having a passenger. So this would be appropriate for our manager of operations to respond to. So again, the first question is, other communities have bi-weekly garbage pickup. Have you investigated the possibility of implementing a bi-weekly garbage pickup?
So I'd say we're certainly aware of the bi-weekly garbage pickup option. I think in other communities that's coupled with on the odd weeks, picking up kitchen garden waste, which is something that is also on the agenda, which we're exploring. Certainly not there yet with not having a place locally to take that material. So that's something we're exploring with the regional district.
And then the follow-up question is, are garbage trucks staffed by 2 people or just 1?
Just 1, yeah. The one-armed or the armed garbage trucks will normally just have the 1 operator. And they do sometimes have to get out of the truck. So.
Okay, Councillor Minions.
Can I just clarify, did the city not try bi-weekly garbage pickup at some point a few years ago?
Before my time.
Councillor McClellan.
Yes, we did, and yes, it was bad.
Was one of the reasons, one of the problems, because we were also picking up the kitchen and yard waste?
The kitchen yard waste and the absolute worst is something that I think we should see more of, but it's diapers. And I went out with the crews a couple of times, and not only because it's wet, they got very heavy on our crews. They don't go from this house and then the other one. They go every house on the block, and they're moving, and they got to pick up those things. So we did get some injuries for the heavy things. The way it would work is like our director has said. If we have kitchen yard waste, which I'm 200% in favor of doing. It's something we said we would do, and we seem to be waiting for a regional district that doesn't need it. So I think we should debate that, but that's another night. But these guys who don't know how to handle the tech. But anyway, we did it. It didn't work. We went back to every week, and it's working well. But it would really work well if we had kitchen and yard waste on the every week, and this on this alternate out with recycle. It works in a lot of other towns, but to do it without it, it would be, in our town, it just was awful.
Thank you. Another question? Should Wilf come back up to the mic? Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The final question here from Debbie Haggard is, she references that the city has an internal audit for savings and staffing, et cetera. Have you thought of reviewing other communities of a similar size and looking at their budgets and staffing? I think a lot could be learned if the city did this.
CAO?
Mr. Mayor, Council will recall that we recently completed the Rogers review of exempt staff and organizational change. So we've been through the exempt or the management side of our operation. We haven't done a formal internal audit as far as our staffing model. I can tell you that through this budget process, I work closely with every manager and reviewed staffing in every department. As you're learning, municipalities and the services we provide are not cookie cutter. We choose service levels differently than other communities. In some communities, the regional government, a level of government, for example, will provide a service like recreation or aquatics or something, where it's different than here. So it's not always apples and apples. Having said that, that might be a good process to go through. So if council wants to consider developing an internal audit team to look at other communities and make recommendations, that might not be a bad process.
Okay, thank you. Just back to the budget consideration, questions asked by Debbie Haggard there. Just for council's information, the ACRD right now, and of course the city of Port Alberni contributes to it, because we are dealing with kitchen and yard waste at our landfill, they're faced with considering a $13 million expenditure in order to mechanically deal with the methane that comes off of our landfill. And we're very close to being forced to have to consider that unless we can do something about redirecting that waste. And if we were to take all the kitchen and yard waste out of the landfill, that would move us into a much safer situation. Because of course, we have 30 years of buildup in there that's creating the methane. And it's not as if we stopped it today, the methane would magically stop. But it would improve the situation significantly, and we would avoid that engineering demand being placed on us by the province. $13 million expenditure as a valley is something that we would prefer to avoid if we could. Anything else from another question from the audience? Mr. Anderson. It's okay. You're probably speaking for many people.
No, I don't know about that. The comment was made about live within our means and incredible discipline. That sounds really great. But I look over the past few years, and I hope that's what you follow, because it's certainly something we need. It's something that I haven't seen over the last 10 years that I've been back in Port Alberni. I guess you wouldn't have a rough idea of non-emergency expenditures that weren't included in the last budget, but monies we put out for various things, non-profit organizations, etc. Because we're always seem to be paying $50,000 for this, 10 for this, 5 for that, and that isn't what I would call incredible discipline. So how are you going to deal with that? Or have you an idea of what those costs were in the last, let's say, year, 2 years?
It's possible Director Rothwell can give you that information, maybe not right off the top, but we can certainly get it for you. Yeah.
I'm not talking like broken water lines or stuff.
No, I understand that.
Mr. Mayor, Director Kingston might also be able to respond what the Community Investment Program budget is, and perhaps even comment on expenditures the city's approved outside of that program that maybe should have or could have been in that program.
Okay, is Director Kingston? Director Kingston she looks after the community investment program for us.
So I'm not quite exactly clear on your question, Mr. Anderson, but I'll attempt, and if you can correct me if I'm wrong. The community investment program is about $50,000 in cash grants and in kind, and it appears in two different portions of the budget. One under in-kind grants, and the other under the community development, economic development. There's a line item there. Your question was in terms of money that's spent for non-emergency, for not-for-profits and that type of thing. They apply and receive a grant. There was a number that were brought to council outside of the system, the process for it, and those were organizations that had emerging projects or were unfamiliar with the process, and so those come through that process to report to council, and then council approves them. That money is all within the amount that's budgeted. Okay. So money was not expended beyond what you see in the budget. In fact, we have a bit of surpluses from each year carrying forward to address those as well.
Okay, that did answer part of my question. The other part was projects, and I'm not sure to what extent this happened, but I believe it has, projects that council has gone ahead with because they thought it was the right thing to do that weren't budgeted for. How much of that has happened over the past budget year?
Okay, I think we probably CAO, we'd need to get that information for Mr. Anderson, would we?
Mr. Mayor, that's a bit of a tough question to bring a definitive response to. So the city provides, council approves a budget, and within that operating budget, there are some latitudes, if you like, with department heads, where they may have the ability within an approved budget to allocate funds to one purpose or a similar other, but not to create projects. So there isn't a broad latitude to once a budget's approved to identify new projects and fund those. And council certainly doesn't have the ability to spend money outside of a decision you make in a public meeting. The capital budget involves projects that are defined and budgeted for and approved and completed. So it's quite unlikely that the city would undertake certainly projects or capital projects without those being approved in one way or another in a public meeting by council.
And it sounds to me like what Mr. Anderson is suggesting is that somehow we might spend beyond what our budget was set for the particular year. So hypothetically, if the budget's $33 million, would we spend more than $33 million in that year?
Yeah, that's part of it. Let me give you an example too, because a number of years ago, that wasn't this council, but there was members of the council on there, where I believe it was a policy, but I didn't investigate into that much, where money was allocated for a project through the budget the right way, and it came in under budget. I don't want to get back into the specifics, but I think you'll probably know what I'm talking about. And the department at the time, and it wasn't the department head, it was just the practice that I would understand took place over the years. So that money that was left over was like free money, and it was going to be dedicated to another project that was not budgeted for. Now, I spent 3 months getting up to that thing there, and there was a letter written by Mr. By our CEO at the time, and that gave direction, because there was nothing in writing on how this money should be utilized. And it ended up saying it had to go back into the city funds and become part of the budget for the following year, to that effect. Whether that's happening or not, I don't know, and that's part of the reason why I'm asking the question. I want to make sure that there is no extra money. We can come in under budget, and should be happy to do that, and that helps reduce the taxes or the tax increases in the following years. We just don't add it to different projects, so we couldn't get through the regular budget process.
Right.
So that's the experience we had 3-4 years ago, but that's part of the reason also. But Teresa answered some of my questions.
Okay,
there.
good question. Thank you. CEO, did you want to comment on
Mr.
that?
Mayor, I understand the question, and that should not happen. if a project is under budget, that's city funds, and that goes back into general revenue. I'll give you an example. In 2016, council will recall, we did a project for LED lighting. I think it was $150,000, was it?
Or 165 or something, but yes.
165. And so we put that out to tenders and we got bids, and we came, with the installation and everything, we came in under budget. So manager of operations Takama approached me and said, I'm under budget on this project. I'd like to take the unallocated or the unused funds and expand the scope of the project and purchase some, I believe we purchased some arms, was it? Additional LEDs. So we expanded the scope of the project, but they were LEDs. It was an LED project. We bought more LEDs, and we utilized the full budget. That was something that he didn't approve on. He didn't do on his own. He checked in, got my approval to do, and I thought it was within the nature of the project, and I approved it. So that's an example where we have a check and a balance, and if it's good value for the city, we'll do that. But it wouldn't be correct for us to take that money and put in a playground or something different. That's outside of so expanding the scope of the project within reason, and to be honest, I ran it by the Director of Finance as well, because she keeps us on the straight and narrow. Expanding the scope of the project within reason, where it's good value for the city, makes sense, and we will consider that, but we won't develop a new project. I hope that puts clarity on that.
I think so, yeah. Sure does for me. Okay, anybody else in the audience have a question for council or about the budget, or want to make a comment on the budget? Jake.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
You
No
want to
shortage of
comment on the
questions
budget?
and comments coming in online. This one comes via Facebook, which again, people can post to the discussion board on our Facebook event page, which is accessible through the City of Port Alberni local government Facebook page. So the question is, how does the city plan to increase non-tax revenue sources? What will these sources be? How much revenue will they be expected to generate, and by when?
Go ahead, CEO.
Mr. Mayor, I mentioned earlier in year 2021, the budget plans that we will renegotiate a payment in lieu of taxes from Port Authority. That's one example. Mentioned garbage collection fees would go up to cover our costs. That's another example. I think I'd like to request that Director Kingston come up because a lot of the fees and rentals come through Parks, Recreation, and Heritage, so she can shed more light on how we plan to expand non-taxation revenues.
Thank you. The in the budget for Parks Recreation specifically, they were kept separate in terms of the presentation, so I want to keep them that way. Is that we are projecting an increase in revenue of 7.19%. And the way that we're doing that is there will be an increase in user fees. We're projecting a 2% increase across the board each year. So those are admissions to our facilities. As well, we're looking at all of our facilities around the rental rates that we charge people and actually making it a lot simpler. We have a whole pile of different categories and wanting to streamline that and really looking at what rentals should be producing revenue for us in terms of the types of events and also the types of programs. So at the budget presentation last week, I talked about that we are examining all of our registered programs and adult programs, regardless of the type of program, we should be making a profit on. So the looking at 125% return, and 25% revenue profit on adult programs. Children's programs, we believe, should be subsidized in terms of core recreation services, like things like learn to swim lessons and those ones that have safety and also the social and physical development of children. And we would looking at subsidizing those to the tune of 40% and youth programs to the tune of 60%. That has not been the case in a number of our programs up to now, so that for some of our registered programs, people can expect in September to see a totally different fee structure for registered programs. And I think that's fair. I think it's fair in terms of market and what we're doing within the organization. We're also looking in the Echo Park Fieldhouse. We did renovations this past year and looking at really promoting that as a place for workshops and charging going rates. and increasing the usage that way. Everything we're doing is being examined. So our staff are looking at every course that we've offered. I'm requiring them to do a breakdown of showing the revenue and expenditures and what is our return on investment in terms of that program. So the other thing that we're looking at that's not reflected in this budget is our concessions at the multiplex, and looking at increasing profit margins on the concessions. And again, those should be money makers for us. We're not in the business of subsidizing people's drinks and food at when they're at that facility. The other piece that we're going to be looking at, and it's not by any means looking that we're necessarily going to be increasing the rents, but the whole issue of Harbor Key and what are the expenditures versus the rents for the leases there over the period of the 5-year budget. And again, it's not, I don't want people to be panicking and having the business owners phone me tomorrow and going, what's the increase in that? But what we're doing is our due diligence around what is an appropriate cost recovery. And I need to say we are making money off those leases off of Harbor Key. So it's not a matter that we are subsidizing them, but it's what will the market bear and what's fair in terms of return of investment of taxpayers. In terms of the museum, I did mention last week, is looking at the museum already has done a really good job of increasing revenues. Thanks through Film Fest and the other events they do, the staff there work really hard along with the volunteers who are involved in the museum. One of the things that in the discussions with Jamie Morton, the museum manager, him and I have talked about the potential of putting in admission fees, whether that is an admission fee or a pass, but looking at some way in terms of increased revenues from that. And I know it has all kinds of controversy and people get into debate about whether that's the right thing or not. In here, it's a matter of, we're looking at it for 2018 and giving us the time to actually 2019 and giving us the time to go through and look at appropriate ways of generating that revenue.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks so much, Mr. Mayor, and to Director Kingston. I'm conscious that we had one question through Facebook that was precisely just that around the revenues, the forecasted increase in museum revenue by admissions when our admissions are by donation. Where is the increased foot traffic coming from to pay for the donation? So I think you've just sort of addressed that matter, but just wanted to make sure that got brought forward around how that's going to occur.
And there's still going to be a lot of discussion and input as to what that looks like. What I'm suggesting and what the challenge has been to all of our staff in my department is we need to look at maximizing revenues. We need to be putting a more entrepreneurial mindset to the work we do in terms of everything, and we need to look at what's core and not core. And I'll just also say that within the recreation department, in children's programs and youth programs, we are determining what we see as core services. And those that we consider not core, should we be in that business? So looking at, there will be some programs that we currently offer that may be offered by other organizations and other sectors in the community. So why should we be offering that if it's not a revenue generator for us?
Okay, CEO.
Mr. Mayor, just to echo those comments, I mentioned to you earlier that this budget, this not go forward, this go backward budget has already driven innovation. And the Director Kingston has just exemplified for you the kind of innovation that city staff have turned themselves to try to continue to provide high quality services, but to have a more business minded approach to that.
Thank you. Oh, Councillor Alberni.
If I could just add, just for the information, I guess, of council and the public, as far as non-tax revenue comes in, there's also possibilities that the Food Security Climate Change Committee will bring forward an annual report around solar installations. That could potentially turn something like the Glenwood Center into an electricity revenue generator rather than something that we're paying for. So there's that kind of an opportunity as well.
Thank you. Any other questions from home?
Yes, there's more. The next question comes again from Facebook. What is the plan to attract businesses, new residents, and visitors? What results are expected and by when? I believe this question was also brought forward at the February 8th budget meeting, the most recent one we had. And I'm conscious that our Manager of Economic Development is not here this evening, and certainly this is something that he's a big focus of his department. But certainly, Mr. Mayor and Council, you're welcome to step in if you so wish.
Well, I know that a lot of that information has been supplied, and it is available through his department. I don't have it at the top of my head right now, but I know that it is available and has been supplied. Councilor Minions.
Just a follow up to that, the Chamber of Commerce is putting together a growth committee. I think one thing that's been identified is that we've set our growth goal of 20,000 residents. I can't remember which year that's by, but we haven't necessarily laid out a clear plan for how we're going to get there or what the steps are going to be. So through the Chamber, a committee is being put together to make some recommendations that would be brought forward to Council. And if there's people in the public who are interested in taking part in that, you can get in touch with Bill Collette at the Chamber of Commerce, or Malcolm Meninga is leading it.
Thank you. Any other questions from our audience here in the room? Okay. Here we go.
Mr. Mayor and Council and members of the public, my name is Travis Cross. I live in Port Place, and I'm also the president of the Port Alberni Professional Firefighters Association. So I have a question and some comments. And it seems like there's been a fair amount of debate about, or not debate, but questions regarding what a 4-person engine response looks like compared to a 3-person engine response. I think it's good that those questions are asked because the difference is quite significant. And it's not as was suggested, just a modest change in the service level. It's quite a drastic change in the service level. And I think it's important for the public and council to understand what those impacts are, not only in the response model, but also how that the difference of those two different response models reflect in a budget. And my question is if council has given the fire chief an opportunity to construct a budget that reflects having 4 people respond as is the case right now all the time.
Sorry, one more time. Your question was?
So my question is whether or not council has given the fire chief the opportunity to construct a budget that reflects a response model responding with 4.
He's been given a budget that shows a goal of a 5% increase over 5 years. That was his target. So with the same way it was the target for each of our departments.
Okay. So my comments, and it's important for the community and Mayor and Council yourselves to understand, and I think you guys have been asking the right questions and stuff, but what that's going to entail, and it's already been mentioned tonight that what that means is losing 2 members through attrition, and then also once the overtime budget is spent, we will no longer respond with 4, we will respond with 3. And also what was mentioned due to safety concerns and through work safe regulation, it prohibits us to enter a structure when there's a fire when we respond with 3. So if we get to a call with 3 on scene and there's a fire in the building, we cannot enter to get to the seat of fire and put that fire out. It's next to impossible to put a fire out from the outside. So we'll be forced to have to be outside until more help arrives to be able to put the fire out inside the building. Also with that, if there is someone in the building that we may have to rescue, effective rescue, if we have 3-person response model, we cannot go into that building. So we will not go, and that's also spelled out in the WorkSafe Regulation 31.23. If we show up with 3, we will not be able to go into that building to rescue someone if someone's in that building. So it's very concerning for us as firefighters. I would think is concerning for the public, but I just urge the public to really, and Mayor and Council to really consider what those implications are and what that direction means of keeping that budget to 5% and losing those 2 members and responding with 3 at certain times. So we do have a complement right now. We lost 1 member through retirement that we haven't replaced, and we have 20 highly trained professional firefighters to respond to these fires. And we know the significance, being on the front lines and responding to these fires, what that change in response model will mean. And in 2011, we agreed with, I guess, budget pressure, recognizing budget pressures in the city. We didn't want to lose having that 4th person on the truck, and we agreed to overtime at straight time to maintain those 4 people on the truck. So that was our commitment, and kind of gives you a sense of how important that is to us, and from what we see out there in the field. And I don't know personally any other industry that works for overtime at straight time, but we knew that was important, and we did that to maintain that 4th person. If that 4th person is taken off the truck, then it would revert back to time and a half if we just have 3 people. But so I just wanted to give you a sense of how important that is, and that's about all I had to say. And I just want to accept that I could not advocate to you the importance of having those 4 people on the truck if I didn't believe in it, and if I didn't see the positive impact it makes on the community, on businesses, on industry, all our contract partners, and the value it provides to our mutual aid and automatic aid partners. So I'd just like you guys to really look deep into this and consider it. And I know tonight, as was mentioned, is the apex of the budget. So there's still opportunities to take a hard look at this and make an informed decision, and what you guys are seeking right now. So I guess that's one other point is just when we do respond with 3, or if we should respond with 3, right now we go with 4. It's inevitable that it's going to equal higher fire loss, financially, economically, and God forbid a loss of life, because as I mentioned before, you cannot effectively put fire out from the outside. So if we're not allowed to enter, and a fire could increase up to 16 times in 3 minutes. So if we don't have that 4th person in there within 3 minutes, it could increase up to 16 times, which really significantly causes a lot more damage, and creates a very untenable atmosphere for us to enter, or anyone to survive inside. So these are some points that I want you guys to consider, and for the public to consider, and to reach out to the councillors if they feel strong about maintaining our ability to do our job effectively how it is right now.
Travis, I think there are a couple of councillors that have some questions for you. So Councillor Sauvé and Councillor Alberni, for sure, would like to ask some questions.
Yeah, just 2 comments. First of all, when I was introduced to all this information and the 5% for the 5-year, I knew there was going to be an issue. And one thing that I never wanted to debate with council is when it comes to our core services, when it comes to public safety. And this scenario always comes to my mind of a house fire or smoke fire, and having some firemen just sitting outside not be able to go in. And does it happen often? Probably not, but it's that one time that is just not worth for me. So I truly hope we could keep our 4-man response team. I did ask, to answer one of your questions, I did ask the fire chief last time, I don't know if it was mixed up in the confusion of all the questions, to be able to come back with a budget certain outline respecting that four-man response team. So I don't expect him to be prepared tonight to respond to that, but I do want to look and see how it would reflect our budget. So I did ask that question to the fire chief, so hopefully in the next few budget meetings we'll hear more about it. Thanks.
Councillor Alberni?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to make sure that that question was asked. I think that's what Mr. Cross was getting at, was what is the status quo cost? What would be the status quo cost if we kept the four-man crew for the 5 years, as opposed to the 5% that staff has laid out for us? I think if we're going to make an informed decision, we can't just make it from a risk and from a risk perspective. We have to make it from a financial perspective as well. So I think we do need that that scenario of what a status quo cost would be, so that we can make that determination.
Thank you. Councillor Minions?
Thank you. And I know that this is just kind of a follow-up to that. I know this is going to be hard to predict, but there's obviously going to be a larger difference in how many crews will be 3 men versus 4, or women, if we ever get any women firefighters, in 2017 versus 2020 when we lose another member. I'm curious if the fire chief could possibly bring back maybe an estimate in what that cost would be if the status quo, or if not replacing the member, if we didn't replace in 2017, but how much further would the cost be in 2020, or if we replaced that member. I'm just curious about how much more overtime that 2020 loss will cost us effectively.
Yeah, the same way we've asked for the overtime costs, estimated overtime costs in 2017 of running with a 3-man crew and having to call in somebody on overtime in the event 4 people needed for a particular fire. Because obviously not every call requires 4 people, but what would it be? What's the projection? Anything else, Council? Travis, thank you very much.
Thank you. I just want to, just comment on what might be you mentioned the status quo. So the status quo of the response model may not reflect the status quo for the budgets. And what I mean by that is our fire chief is new to his position, 3 months to his position, and giving him that opportunity to really operate under a 4-person crew and reflect a budget like that, maybe, and not to put you on the spot, chief, but maybe there's some opportunity to manage it in a way that he might find some efficiencies or whatever. So I'm just urging to give him that opportunity. So thank you for everything. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else wish to address council or have questions on anything to do with budget? All right.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A further question via Facebook from Guy Langlois, basically expressing a requester, I suppose, to the city to take a closer look at the Industrial Heritage Society and how they operate the facilities that they currently lease, I suppose. They have some large buildings that Mr. Langlois would like to see considered as far as how they're operated and the amount of resources that have gone into them. Has the city looked at what these facilities take to operate? Why hasn't anything been done to improve the energy efficiency of these facilities? Energy use could easily be cut by retrofitting these facilities, a one-time investment that could save taxpayers thousands of dollars and extend the life of these buildings. So again, kind of focused towards improvements at these facilities, energy use-wise and otherwise.
CEO.
Mr. Mayor, that's a good question. The city has a number of larger and older buildings that we've committed to industrial heritage. So we have the Industrial Heritage Center, which is the old arena, the Roundhouse, where the trains are, the train station, and of course the McLean Mill buildings. This budget includes that after 2 years, the city would discontinue paying utility costs for those buildings. So currently we pay utility costs for those buildings. And it's our intention in this budget that we renegotiate that relationship so that we do not pay those anymore. So I guess that's one approach to us finding efficiencies for us, is that we wouldn't pay those. So who's going to pay them? The occupant, if it's still Industrial Heritage Society or McLean Mill Society or whoever. Probably the bigger issue here is that we have quite an extensive stock of old buildings and old equipment and old trains that and old sawmills that we have collected, and we love them, but they're not cheap to maintain. And so going forward 5, 10, 20 years, what is the city going to do? Are we going to be replacing and renewing these old structures? Are we going to divest ourselves of them? We've grown this network of industrial heritage infrastructure that now has become a bit of a cost center for us. So that's a bit of a long answer. So the budget envisions that we will stop paying utility costs for those buildings, but the budget hasn't answered the question about are we going to invest capital into those buildings? Are we going to maintain them as they are? That sort of thing. That's a question for another day.
Or are we going to continue to own them?
Look, question for another day.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
If I may, Mr. Mayor, just to follow up on that, Mr. Langlois also sort of expresses concern about his perspective around the train station particularly being underutilized, and that why are taxpayers expected to pay to store someone else's cars? This space is prime real estate. This building could house numerous shops and even a pub. A good example is the train station in Nanaimo. So he's encouraging the city to consider leasing the space that would bring in new revenue.
CEO, you might want to comment on future responsibility for the train station.
Mr. Mayor, the train station up until the end of 2016 was under lease to the Industrial Heritage Society, who have occupied that building for quite a number of years, and in fact have restored the building for us. So it's as beautiful as it is today because of the Industrial Heritage Society. Having said that, council, although you haven't directed this, you've indicated individually that you envision the McLean Mill Society leading at the train station going forward. And I know that the McLean Mill Society and the IHS have been discussing what that looks like, and because they both have hopes and dreams, I guess, for that facility. McLean Mill Society has a vision that they will share with you on March 1st that involves more activity in that site, perhaps some revenue generation, some of the things that question addresses. So I think March 1st, council will have a better idea of what McLean Mill Society envisions and how they see IHS being involved in that discussion, and in fact how they see the museum being involved there, because that is a really good location for our museum to do outreach and interaction with the community on heritage.
Okay, thank you. Is that it for our comments, questions from home?
No, Mr. Mayor. No. The next, this is more of a comment, I suppose, with respect to the fire department, and this comes via Facebook. I think the city should implement an affirmative action policy in recruiting women to volunteer for the fire department. This would increase your volunteer base and reduce your operating budget. Volunteers are typically paid $15 an hour only when they are called out to calls. So again, more of a comment encouraging the city to consider use of volunteers in our fire service.
Do we currently use volunteers? CAO?
Mr. Mayor, the broader question might be about affirmative action and the face of the community and our workforce. And the manager of HR is here, and if she doesn't mind, I'll put her on the spot and ask her to comment on that.
All right. Ms. Tremblay.
So, Mr. Mayor, just to frame that question, the question is about affirmative action, specifically in the fire department, but broadly in the city. Does the face of our workforce reflect the face of our community? And if not, what are we going to do about that?
Yes, you are putting me completely on the spot because I have no, I guess, research or stats to show what the demographic, gender-based makeup of our workforce is. I could easily do that. I don't think there's a glaring lack of women within our workforce, and the question or the comment was relating to an affirmative action plan for women. I don't know if it's relevant or appropriate for I guess, application to a volunteer program within the fire world. So I'm not sure that's
Well, at this point,
necessarily
volunteer doesn't apply to our fire department,
yeah.
right?
No, absolutely.
So it's not something that's even in the cards at this point.
Yeah, yeah. Now, whether there is review of our demographic base of our workforce, that's probably not necessarily specific to budget discussions, but it could be something we could undertake.
Okay, thank you.
Pretty good job for somebody on the spot.
Yeah, thanks. Normally when people come up here, they try and leave and get asked another question.
It wasn't me who put you on the spot, but thank you for coming up.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Another question from Facebook, this one with respect to police services. The question is, with $1 million in surplus in the police services, why is the plan to cut back on officers to help clean up the city? Shouldn't the plan be to increase the number of officers we have? So again, with $1 million in surplus in the police services budget, why is the plan to cut back on officers?
Well, I think really the initial response to that is that $1 million that's set aside for policing reserve is in the event of a major expenditure, a major event such as a murder or what have you that is extremely expensive in terms of policing time. So we keep that there as a fund to draw in the event that something happens, because it certainly has happened in other communities where they haven't paid attention to the recommendations that there be a reserve fund set up and have been caught having to pay for these major expenditures. It has been recommended to us as a city over many years that we should be building this fund, and that's exactly what we've done. It's there in case we need it. So what the CAO was suggesting was that we build beyond that with not so much a surplus, but an under expenditure. CAO, did you want to add any to that?
No, Mr. Mayor, the inspector is here. He may want to comment on that.
No. Covered it off for you, okay? Thank you. Okay, anything else from Councillor Minions?
Can I just clarify, because they did note, why is the plan to reduce our members? And the plan in the next couple, there's a plan for one reduction, but not beyond that at this point.
That's right. Okay.
That's currently it, Mr. Mayor, but certainly there may be other comments from those members
Okay.
in attendance here right now.
Anything from the audience? Anything else from council? Councillor Minions.
Just have to read my questions. On the RCMP budget, when the CAO was reading through it just occurred, and talking about the manager position for this year, a comment was made about overseeing the city's $6 million contract. Our Judy Rogers report suggested having the fire chief oversee that contract, as well as some other things, and we adopted that recommendation. So has that plan changed?
CEO.
Mr. Mayor, that's correct. The Rogers report recommended that the fire chief be promoted, if you like, to the Director of Protective Services and oversee bylaw enforcement, fire, and police. So we didn't enact that recommendation. As you know, I left the position of fire chief, and we've only recently filled it. So that recommendation, that action that was approved by council remains on our status report as a to-do. I would consider that as a to consider. I know the fire chief right now does not have the capacity to take on that workload, and in my opinion, what we need at the RCMP detachment is not a manager who works in a different building. We need a manager who works in that building, and the fire chief can't work in that building. So he can't be in two places at once. So in my opinion, the needs at the police detachment dictate that we have a manager in that work site, in that workplace. It might be that in the future, we get things established there that we can consider having a manager who manages several points, and maybe that fire chief might be that person, but in the short term, I do not think that would be a successful move. It might also be that if we put a manager at the RCMP detachment, at some point, the fire chief might still become the director of protective services, and that RCMP support manager might report to the fire chief. So I'm saying the same thing about 3 different ways. I don't see that being the fire chief managing that work group in the short term.
Okay. It just seems like we're having the discussions completely separately. When that was our original direction when we approved the Judy Rogers report. I know that you were out of the position at that time. So I know that things have changed a lot since then. But if we approve this budget and approve hiring a manager, then that's just sort of somewhat lost without really thoroughly discussing it as a council, if that's the direction we want to go or not. So I see the issues with having them in 2 different buildings. I just wonder if we need to have more conversation as a council about if we still wanted to follow that direction or if we're sort of abandoning that.
I can appreciate that. That is one of those recommendations that looks really good on an organizational chart, but you council may recall that we did discuss making that move when I was still in the fire chief position. And we talked about the need for bylaw enforcement to be located with me and for me to be co-located both in the fire department and in the police detachment. So we had some organizational logistical challenges, and we felt that we would need support staff, for example, to support that new position and bylaw. And in the end, it just cost too much to put them together. So it still remains on our list as I said, as something we should consider, but it's not a move that I think would be in our best advantage right now.
But you're right, if there are still questions, then it is something we need to discuss more. And we have to before we finalize this process. Okay, so it appears we've come to the end of our questions, both from home and from our audience, and from council, I believe. You're trying to put Alicia on the...
You're hoping that I go and stay so late. I'm trying to get the press on that.
So, everybody in attendance and watching from home and contributing, thank you so much for participating in this first e-town hall. And our next meeting is March the 1st, and about the same time, same place. And we'll be focusing on the budget again at that time. Thank you very much, everybody. And council, we need a motion to adjourn.
I'll make that motion.
So move second.
Okay, all in favor? Thank you very much.